Brennan Mahoney, tribute speech. During the years of 1939 to 1945, the world was at war. Inept and great leaders alike strove to save their lands from the ambitions of the Nazi forces. Among the victorious was one of the greatest leaders in the history of Great Britain and one of the most influential politicians of the 20th century. Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the time. Churchill once stated that the price of greatness is responsibility, and through his great loyalty and perseverance, he lived and led true to his words. Prime Minister Churchill is undoubtedly best known for his leadership during the Second World War. Before the war, however, his political career centered around his strong opposition to the British policy of appeasement. British politicians and people alike thought it would be in the best interest of their empire to allow Hitler to expand into Eastern Europe. The only opponent to this clearly flawed policy, however, was Winston Churchill. Knowing that the price of greatness is responsibility, Churchill spoke against the rhetoric of the politicians and against the people in an attempt to save them. Churchill, for the next 5 years, was faced with the grave task of fixing the mistakes made by the hands of his peers. Even as Hitler continued to expand into Eastern Europe, there was still strong sentiment in Britain to make peace with the Germans. Winston Churchill, however, refused to make peace with the Nazis. Instead, Winston Churchill prepared his people for a long, grueling war, once again boasting his faith and loyalty in those people. Before the war reached England's doorstep, Winston Churchill delivered 3 speeches to Parliament, each one more inspiring than the last. After Germany conquered numerous British allies, Winston Churchill said to his people, "We will fight in the beaches, we will fight on the landing grounds, we will fight in the fields and in the streets. We will fight in the hills, we will never surrender." 2 weeks later, Paris was captured, and Britain remained as the lone enemy to the German forces. Once again, Winston Churchill had to motivate his people. This time, he said to them, "Let us so brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves, that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour." And indeed it was, Mr. Churchill. During the summer and autumn of 1940, Germany bombed British cities, killing thousands. Churchill refused to surrender. During the bombings, the loyal Prime Minister, from his protective bunker, would actually speak to his people over the radio, assuring them that victory was nearby. Once again, Churchill was correct. Britain won the battle and became the only country thus far to have avoided German invasion. Without Winston Churchill's strong loyalty, perseverance, and faith in his people, Britain would have fallen, and the Second World War would have been over well before the entrance of the United States. Winston Churchill gave his people, his country, and the world a fighting chance. Towards the end of the Second World War, Winston Churchill and the other Allied leaders had their sights on rebuilding Europe, a continent left in ruins. Prime Minister Churchill and his dear friend, President Eisenhower, also had another common goal: assuring that a war such as this would never reoccur. Again, Churchill said true to his words that the price of greatness is responsibility. Churchill was already well on his way to greatness after the Battle of Britain, but with that came the responsibility of restoring peace. Once again, Churchill set and faced the task head-on, and once again, he succeeded. Churchill's part in creating the United Nations helped create peace around the world and assured that history would not repeat itself. Finally, on May 7th, 1945, Germany surrendered. Churchill said to a massive crowd that gathered in London, "This is your victory." The people replied, "No, it is yours." Winston Churchill would forever be a hero to the British people. Churchill died on January 24th, 1965, at the age of 90 years old. Thousands gathered in London for his funeral. Winston Churchill left his mark on history through his great loyalty, perseverance, hard work, and faith in his people. Churchill once stated, "You have enemies? Good. That means you stood up for something sometime in your life." Winston Churchill stood up for something. He stood up for peace and freedom. And he then refused to let others take them away from the people and country he loved. Winston Churchill accepted the responsibility of refusing to surrender and refusing to give up. And with that responsibility, achieved greatness.